And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Wednesday morning's flying weather graphic here showing solid IFR covering the Bering Sea right into the southwest coast here and Norton Sound up through the Bering Strait and hitting, looks like maybe Kivalina up to Cape Lisburne. Then kind of up and over and coming down right along the central and eastern Arctic coast. A little bit of IFR there over the eastern Brooks Range, and also some IFR, at least starting out, lingering there for the west central and eastern Alaska range, and then IFR for the eastern southeast coast with VFR here under higher pressure from the western Arctic coast there right on down to Kodiak Island and even into the Copper River Basin. For the afternoon, IFR over the central part of the state, including Kodiak Island, the Gulf of Alaska, right on up to the North Slope, with the IFR here pulling back northward there off the Arctic coast. Still a little bit of marginal VFR here on the east side and mostly just marginal for the Panhandle. Otherwise, marginal VFR, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta on up to Seward Peninsula and the Kobuk Valley, Noatak Valley areas, mainly along the southern slopes of the western Brooks Range. Pretty much still IFR out here over the Bering Sea, and the Aleutians, maybe marginal for the Fox Islands. And then for Thursday morning, IFR slides on up into Bristol Bay, at least reaching King Salmon, maybe a little farther north and east there. Definitely back inland here over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, northward to the Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula. And no change for the Aleutians, except more marginal more IFR for the Unalaska Island area, IFR along the central western Brooks Range, western Arctic coast. VFR as you head east here, looks like a good VFR from the Yukon Flats, even Arctic Village there, right on down into the Kenai Peninsula, Homer, Seldovia, Port Muller, Kodiak Island, mostly VFR. Marginal VFR, southeastern Copper River Basin, right on down the Panhandle. Still have some IFR over toward the east side there. And that again vanishes for the afternoon Thursday with mostly marginal conditions for the Panhandle and still some lower stuff here along the Coast Range resulting in possible IFR and maybe some of that into western and northwestern Prince William Sound. Otherwise, Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, right on down to Kodiak Island, good VFR, but this VFR area kind of getting pinched back with marginal VFR now, due to that system coming in from the west and northwest there, spreading in to the central interior and even a little farther east up there toward the Brooks Range. Otherwise, St. Lawrence Island breaking out to marginal VFR with IFR covering the remainder of the Bering Sea and just about all of the Aleutians. Passes Anatuvik and Atigan. Look on the marginal side again tomorrow at times, and for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, rainy VFR, windy, same forecast, VFR there, and Isabel, marginal VFR to start, becoming VFR probably through the afternoon, and Mentesta, look for some occasional marginal VFR throughout the entire day, and Tanita, looking good, VFR for that pass, Portage, VFR, Chilkoot and White, marginal. And for the freezing levels, cool pool of air pushing in across the Panhandle, so about 6,000 feet there, not much higher back to the west or to the north here, and then dropping back to 2,000 feet over the western Arctic coast. Warmer air out west here, running from 10,000 feet here over the northwest Bering Sea up to 14,000 foot plus there off to the west and southwest. And with that very warm air coming in, you got to get up to, again, freezing levels about 14,000 feet out here. So look for some icing between 14,000 and 20,000 feet or so. So if you stand for that, nothing to worry about. And then looking at considerable moderate sliding eastward here out of the Russian Far East across the Chukchi Sea into the western Brooks Range. Otherwise, maybe a little bit of lingering icing threat here over the southeast coast. Jet stream, again with that cold pool coming in, we've got 95 to 115 knot westerlies at 33,000 feet blowing right across the southern Panhandle and Dixon entrance. Otherwise, westerlies at 70 knots of that next system, those winds will be pushing that moisture in into the west and northwest part of the state. Then those curve back around to the northeast at 70 knots there. Kuskokwim Bay, north 80 knots in the eastern Aleutians. 9,000 feet, good westerly flow up here, again across the Chukchi Sea up to 40 to 45 knots. Lighter down to the south here, 35 knots, blowing in across mainly Dixon Entrance, lighter over the Panhandle, and then west-northwesterly 65 to 70 knots over the western and central Aleutians. 3,000 feet, west-northwest, 60 knots out in this area. Westerlies 35 to 40 knots, low pressure tracking eastward here. Going to make for a pretty windy day there for the western central Arctic coast, even into the western Brooks Range area, but at 3,000 feet, looking at sustained winds 35 knots, southwest or west-southwest 40 knots there for the Seward Peninsula, and 35 knots across St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, pretty light at this elevation, associated with that low off the north coast of the Panhandle. Turbulence-wise, pretty smooth here in the east, Gulf of Alaska, down toward the southeast coast, but look for considerable moderate turbulence here, western Brooks Range, right on down toward Kotzebue, Seward Peninsula, and also out over the, from about Adak or Atka, westward to Shimia and Attu.